Morning, good afternoon, good evening. Zimbabweans have reduced themselves to nothing more than just wolves howling at the moon. The country is in a mess, and yet after 44 years, we don't seem to know what to do about it. Most disconcerting. This is an audio clip that has been taking the rounds in the social media today. Let's listen to this. I'll stop it there. The gentleman goes on to name a number of other known criminals, whites, uh, Chinese, and so forth, and how Zanu PF is at the heart of it all. That is all true. We have known that Zanu PF is a party of thugs, criminals, and they have teamed up with criminals from all over the world to create this de facto one party state, and they've used the proceeds from the looting to keep the regime in power. We've also known that ZANU PF has labeled the opposition as puppets of the West. It has been a convenient excuse to deny not only the opposition, but the people of Zimbabwe, the general masses of Zimbabwe, the right to a meaningful, free, fair, and credible election. We can talk about ZANU PF criminality all we want, but after 44 years of rigged election, I think we should be focusing on how the hell are we going to stop the ZANU PF rigging the elections? That is what we should be focused on. That should be our number one target. How are we going to end this dictatorship? Because unless we end it, it's going to continue. And after 44 years, I think we have no excuse for failing to really focus on that issue. I believe we have, since the late 1990s, tend to that point, to that issue. And people came to the consensus that we needed an opposition that will implement the democratic reforms to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. The alternative is for the country to have another war against the regime. I don't think we need another war. We just need to think. We need to be smarter. One thing that we inherited after independence in 1980 is a fundamental understanding that we must have free, fair, and credible elections. How that is to be fulfilled has been the challenge. Zanu PF, from the word go, realized that if they had free, fair, and credible election, they will not hang on to power. And so they've devised ways of rigging elections. The challenge for us then is to make sure that elections are free, fair, and credible. We've had many golden opportunities to get this done. But knowing the best opportunities we have had was during the 2008 to 2013 GNU. With hindsight, every Zimbabwean should understand, at least understand now, that the 2008 to 2013 GNU, the primary purpose of that GNU was to implement the democratic reforms to ensure we have got free, fair, and credible elections. And so the focus should be, why is it that we failed to implement even one token reform? Not only did we fail to implement even one token reform, ever since the GNU debacle, the opposition have participated in these flawed elections, knowing fully well that the process is flawed and that participating will only give Zanu PF legitimacy. But they've participated regardless, out of greed. Why is it that so many Zimbabweans out there failed to grasp that fundamental problem? I believe that the GNU was our ticket out of jail, our get out of jail card. And we failed to use it. It's interesting to note how the opposition themselves, the opposition leaders themselves, have ignored the primary task the people of Zimbabwe set for them, i.e., implement the democratic reforms to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. And they've participated in these flawed elections out of greed. But to continue to make themselves relevant, they've been at great pain to remind us all of how miserable we are under this Zanu PF dictatorship. They want to be elected, but they're not going to do anything to implement reforms. There is some truth in what some of the Zanu PF people have been saying about the opposition, that the opposition has no clue what to do. All they seem to be waiting for is for the economy to completely collapse so that they can take over. They have no idea of how to stop Zanu PF rigging the election, and it seems like they don't want to stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. They can rig the elections, drag the nation deeper and deeper into the abyss, and the opposition will be throwing the spanner in the works to accelerate that economic collapse, because they seem to think that their only chance of ruling the country is when the country is reduced to its ashes. We do not have to wait until the country is completely and utterly destroyed to have political change in Zimbabwe. We need to have a situation where there are free, fair, and credible elections, and the country can start rebuilding. It is most unfortunate that the gentleman was speaking in that audio has completely ignored the challenge before the nation. It's not so much to identify that Zanu PF is corrupt and tyrannical. We already know that. The challenge before the nation is how are we going to end the tyranny, the dictatorship. After 44 years of rigged elections, we cannot expect the solution is that we should let Zanu PF completely destroy the country before we can have any meaningful change. We can stop Zanu PF rigging the election and start rebuilding the country if we focus on getting an opposition that will implement the reforms. The opportunity to implement the reforms, the golden opportunity to implement the reforms, was during the 2008 to 2018 GNU. We cannot deny that the opposition failed to implement even one token reform. We cannot deny that the opposition, ever since the GNU, has been participating in flawed elections to give Zanu PF legitimacy. We should focus on that. If the MDC, CCC failed to implement reforms, and clearly they have, then we should get somebody else who can implement those reforms. That's not rocket science. But instead of focusing on that, we seem to be focusing back on Zanu PF is a party of thugs. We already know that. And denouncing them from the rooftop as a party of thugs is not going to get Zanu PF out of power. After 44 years of rigged elections, I think we should have the common sense to realize that Zanu PF is never going to reform itself out of office. So the question is, how are we going to get Zanu PF out of office? Like I said, if they are rigging the elections, the only other way of removing the regime is as happened in 2017, another military coup. But as we know, the 2017 military coup was only shuffling the Zanu PF cards. It removed one dictator and a few people around him, only to replace him with another dictator. Nothing changed. Street protests, that's another way of changing the regime. But I can tell you now, street protests will never guarantee that the country will have a democratic system out of it. The third alternative is that we should have reforms implemented. At the present moment, we had the opportunity to implement those reforms. Yes, there's water under the bridge now. The opportunity was lost. But nonetheless, last year was another opportunity. We didn't have to participate in those elections to give Zanu PF legitimacy. And yet millions were foolish enough to believe, to be conned by Nelson Chamisa and company into participating in those flawed elections. They were warned that participating will only give Zanu PF legitimacy. They didn't listen. That is what we should be talking about. And not just howling at the moon about Zanu PF being a party of thugs. We know that. We need to make progress here. Howling at the moon is not going to stop Zanu PF rigging 2028 elections. That I can tell you for nothing. We need to use our heads for a change. Thank you very much for listening and have a good day.